On August 5th, 2007, dozens of miners entered the massive labyrinth that was the Crandall Canyon Mine. Unbeknownst to these miners, something terrible was waiting deep underground, and horrifyingly, for many of them, this would be the last time they would ever see the light of day. This is their story, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. About 140 miles south of Salt Lake City, Utah is where you'll find Monte La Salle National Forest. This forest is a massive preservation of 1.2 million acres and also includes the state's second highest mountain range, which are the La Salle Mountains. Right in the middle of all of it is the Crandall Canyon Mine. Unlike many mines, which often spur the development of nearby towns, the Crandall Canyon Mine is fairly remote. The nearest civilization is Huntington, which is a town of around 2,000 people and sits about 10 miles to the southeast of the mine.
Have you guys ever went on a cave tour? I went to Mammoth Cave as a kid, man. I thought it was the coolest shit. Oh, you know what they did? I'll never forget this story. So like the tour guide, he was telling this story. As they were telling the story, they started to dim the lights until there was only one light left. And the story was about this guy, and he was like exploring the cave, trying to route it or whatever, and tragedy happened. There was this big rock or something that like fell on him, and he like couldn't get out. After the rock hit him, the only thing that he could do was look at the light from his torch, and eventually it just went out. And right after the tour guide said that, they turned the light off, and it was completely dark in the cave. And as a kid, I was like, oh my God. They didn't turn the lights back on right away. They let us sit there for like 30 seconds to like think about it. That was really scary as a kid. I remember it to this day. Anyway.
Mining there began in 1939 and continued all the way until 1955, but it would then sit untouched until the early 1980s when it was bought up.
You guys are so stupid. Wait, please. Can you start the story again? I didn't listen to anything you said.
Up by two until the southeast of the mine. Mining there began in 1939 and continued all the way until 1955, but it would then sit untouched until the early 1980s when it was bought out by two other companies. The new co-owners contracted mining operations out to a coal company which employed around 70 miners at any given time afterward. Together, they would also update the mine with modern equipment and transportation systems, and by 1991, as much as 1.5 million tons of coal were removed from the mine each year.
That's like an extremely dangerous job.
As the summer of 2007 wore on, the Crandall Canyon Mine had thousands of feet of corridors that ran thousands of feet deep, providing more than enough work to keep mining going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In a week's time, miners there worked 12-hour shifts and were split into several groups. 2 separate crews would handle the day and night shifts, Tuesday through Thursday, and 2 more would mine from Friday to Sunday. Then on Mondays, everyone worked either the day or night shift to double production once a week. The night shift on Monday, August 5th, 2007 started no different than any other. Between the hours of 6 and 7 p.m., the day crew would be relieved and the night shift would take over. Maintenance mechanics like Jamison Ward and Tim Harper, however, worked slightly offset hours from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. Jamison entered the mine around 5:10 that afternoon and made his way to an area called the South Barrier. In this section, a handful of shift miners were extracting ore around 1,500 feet or 450 meters beneath the ground. He then approached the crew and asked if they were having any maintenance issues that he needed to check out, and they would tell him that earlier in the day a scoop on a critical piece of equipment called a continuous mining machine broke and was in need of repair. After visiting with the men for a few more minutes, Jamison returned to his truck to grab some tools and headed over to begin repairing the scoop.
There's no way I'd ever do this job. No way, absolutely not.
In addition to getting the broken machine operational again, Jamison's task for that night shift was to install circuit breaker posts. These are installed because as the continuous mining machines advance into the mountain, conveyor belts that transport the coal out require power. These posts would now have to wait until the scoop was repaired, which was just as well, considering that the machine needed to advance further before he could start setting the posts anyway. Tim, meanwhile, started his shift with a stop at the above-ground warehouse to pick up some parts and supplies to set up a new charging station in the Section 3 North on the complete opposite side of the mine. When he finally had everything he needed, he returned to his truck and headed into the tunnels. Now, the process of mining coal is obviously more complicated than simply drilling holes into a mountain. There are different ways to mine ore, and the Crandall Canyon Mine employed a system known as room and pillar, which you may remember from the Spring Hill mine disaster video. In basic terms, miners dig out material to create underground rooms, which are really more like wide hallways. Between these, they leave unmined ore in place to act as pillars that provide the support to keep the mine from caving in as the coal is extracted. And there are benefits and drawbacks to this style of mining, but the main drawback is that production is limited since it requires some of the coal to remain behind. This means profits are also far from maximized for mine owners. In any case, at 6 o'clock, the night shift replaced the day shift, and 5 miners continued cutting through rock in the South Barrier section. Less than 2 hours later, as Jameson continued fixing the scoop and Tim installed a charging station on the other side of the mine around them started to rumble. Now, surprisingly, this is a relatively common occurrence inside mines, and this one was registered as a 2.2 on the earthquake Richter scale. At the same time, although it was little more than a minor tremor inside Crandall Canyon Mine, it sounded like there may have been a cave-in further into the work area of the South Barrier. A quick inspection of the section by Don Erickson, who was a mine foreman, revealed nothing out of the ordinary, however, so mining continued. Sometime later, at around 11:30 that night, Jameson finished repairing the scoop and finally got to work installing breaker posts. Then around 2 a.m. on August 6th, he received a call from Tim, and Tim went on to tell him that he was finished with his installation, but after he packed up his truck and went to drive back to the warehouse, the truck refused to start. He then asked Jameson to come pick him up. After the call, Jameson tracked Don down and asked him if he could go help Tim, but he told Jameson to get the breaker post installed first. Otherwise, the mining operation in the South Barrier would have to stop because they wouldn't have power. The breaker post took Jameson another 45 minutes to complete, and when he was finished, he gave Tim a call to let him know he was on his way. 3 minutes later at 2:48 a.m., as Jameson drove away from the South Barrier, a violent crack echoed through the mine that originated near where he had just been working. Just then, the mine started shaking for a second time during the shift. This time, the movement came in at almost a 4 on the Richter scale, and it sounded once again like the South Barrier caved in. Only this time, it had. Coal and rock debris then poured from the ceiling of the mine, blocking every path to the South Barrier and trapping 5 miners as well as Don in the section. The energy from the cave-in also created a burst of wind that caught up to Jameson's truck in the main tunnel and was so forceful that it blew the truck sideways. When it finally came to a stop, he got out and looked back where he came from, only to see that the route to the South Barrier was now completely blocked. He then hopped back into his truck and drove through the main west tunnel to a phone not too far from where his truck skidded to a stop.
Dude, if that happens,
once
you
again,
are
he
so
called Tim
Omega
and
dead.
asked him if he heard or felt the rumble, and was surprised to learn that the same gust of wind that almost threw his truck into a wall made it all the way to Tim's location, along with a scattershot of small rocks. One of these rocks apparently hit Tim's head so hard that it injured his right eardrum. Elsewhere in the mine and at the surface, foremen were trying to get a sense of what happened. Attempts to reach Don by phone were unsuccessful, meaning that the cave-in could have severed the South Barrier phone lines, or worse. As this was happening, Jameson picked up Tim and turned around to head back toward where the blast of air and rock came from, along the main west tunnel. And along this tunnel are individual sections called crosscuts. The 5 miners and Don were trapped at crosscut 140 and 141, but when Jameson and Tim reached crosscut 113, a massive single piece of coal was blocking the entire remainder of the tunnel. Upon seeing this, the pair then rushed to the nearest phone and called the mine superintendent to brief him on the situation. At 3:30 a.m., so less than an hour after the cave-in, the mine rescued.
How much do these guys get paid? There's no amount of money that they could give me to do this. They could give me $1 million an hour and I would tell them to off. No, I would. There's no way I'm going down there, man. My life is more important than $1 million, man.
Team and the Mine Safety and Health Administration, or MSHA, were informed of the incident and began mobilizing. A call was placed to the sheriff's office, and before long, deputies and medics began showing up at the mine. Plans for what to do next were underway using what was provided by Jameson and Tim once they exited the mine. It was then decided that rescuers were going to try to reach the trapped men from 2 angles, one horizontal and one vertical. While one crew was working inside the mine to clear debris from the entryways en route to the South Barrier, another would go to the top of the mountain and drill straight down to where the men were last known to be.
Dude, I bet you, however they try to rescue these guys, the company that they work for is not going to allow them to do anything that's going to affect their profit margin. I bet you.
The intention of this, however, wasn't to remove the men from the mine vertically. Instead, the drilling was done in hopes of supplying the men with fresh air, food, and water. Now, it might be easy to assume that the crew working inside the mine would reach the trap miners before the vertical shaft was drilled, but removing the debris from the mine meant putting rescuers in a highly unstable environment. It was unclear at the time just how badly the mine had been damaged, so they'd have to work slowly and reinforce the main tunnel along the way to ensure it wouldn't cave in again. Initial estimates put the time to complete the vertical shaft at about 1 full week, meaning that not only did they expect the rescue
A full week in the mine?
efforts inside to take longer than a week, but it also raised concerns about whether or not the men stuck inside could survive that long, if they even survived the collapse at all. By the afternoon of the day of the collapse, communication still hadn't been established between rescuers and the trapped miners. In this type of scenario, one of the ways that those trapped could communicate with rescuers is to bang on the rock walls or pipes with a tool to indicate their location and status. If necessary, they can even communicate back and forth using Morse code. And with the phone lines to that section down, rescuers hope to hear tapping, but it just never seemed to come. Work to reach the miners continued around the clock, but then on the night of August 7th, seismic activity returned and the mine was evacuated. By then, the ordeal was quickly approaching 48 hours in, and now the effort to save them was forced to a standstill. That same night, a press conference was held by mine and county officials, including the Crandall Canyon Mine owner. In his initial statement, the co-owner was adamant that the collapse was caused by an earthquake and that the trapped miners had enough air and water to last them a few weeks.
But they don't what? Dude, this guy just said that the trapped miners could last a few weeks. What?
At the press conference, though, it was impossible not to notice that his demeanor wavered between angry and contemptuous.
Yeah.
And this may have been in part due to the fact that seismologists openly disagreed with the executive. Instead, they believed that the miners didn't have nearly as much breathable air as he was letting on.
Dude, what I tell you guys, it always comes down to money, man. This guy doesn't give a shit about those miners, man.
When Jameson and Tim first inspected the damage near the South Barrett, they noticed that the stoppings in the area had been destroyed. A stopping is a durable, incombustible wall constructed inside mines to separate intake air from return air. These are crucial since carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide are ever-present dangers inside mines. When the stoppings came down, the ventilation system that brings good air in and takes bad air out was compromised. This meant that there was no telling how much air, if any, was getting to the trapped miners. Scientists were also of the opinion that the cave-in caused the seismic activity, not the other way around, and for good reason. An earthquake and seismic activity caused by mining have separate and distinct signatures on seismometer readings, and those from around the time of the cave-in were not consistent with those of natural earthquakes. As you might have suspected, the co-owner had reasons for pushing the earthquake narrative.
Yeah.
As we've established, Crandall Canyon was mined using the room and pillar system. However, companies grew frustrated by this way of mining because of all the revenue that had to be left inside to keep the ceiling from collapsing. So over time, a slight alteration to the room and pillar approach was developed to solve this problem. Using this new method, when a set of rooms was finished, the miners could start to remove pillars from the furthest point and let small sections of the roof collapse. As the pillars were removed, small controlled cave-ins would occur, and those could be mined too. This is called retreat mining, and although it's more lucrative, it's kind of risky. Obviously, as pillars are removed, there are fewer and fewer supports sharing the weight of all the rock above, and that increases the stress on the remaining pillars. In fact, the MSHA has regulations around retreat mining, and it's required that mines submit and have approved a roof support plan to keep their miners safe. And while the goal of retreat mining is to allow predictable portions of the ceiling to fall when a pillar is removed, it's not an exact science and things can go poorly quickly, even with an approved plan. If too much weight is transferred to too few pillars, it can result in what's known as a coal outburst, which is exactly what it sounds like. Coal pillars become so compressed that they collapse and coal bursts from the location of the break. Anyways, back inside the mine, the effort to reach the mine.
Dude, that is so scary. There's no way, man.
Horizontally restarted, and late on August 9th, a second vertical hole about 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters wide was started. The smaller circumference of this second hole meant they'd penetrate the area the trapped miners occupied quicker than the first vertical hole. This was becoming more and more crucial to establish communication and perform air readings to get a sense of what conditions were like where they were trapped. Then, the following day, on August 10th, the drill broke through the ceiling of the section, having bored its way some 1,800 feet or about 550 meters into the mountain. This was the first glimmer of hope since the miners became trapped in the early mornings of August 6th, but it wouldn't last long. Attempts to communicate with anyone who might be stuck in the section were unsuccessful, but the most telling and concerning development came from the air readings taken at the borehole. The word air is often used interchangeably with the word oxygen, but the air we breathe is actually about 78% nitrogen and only 21% oxygen. In mines, for a variety of reasons, carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide are more plentiful and the composition of the air can vary. But crucially, if oxygen concentration in the air drops to about 15%, that's when things start to become more dangerous and the symptoms of hypoxia usually set in. If oxygen concentrations drop to a further 7.5%, there's simply not enough to sustain life. And horrifyingly, at the top of the mountain, the readings from the air flowing out of the borehole registered just 7% oxygen. When the news was announced at another press conference later in the day, the owner once again downplayed the significance of the readings. He claimed that it was just indicative of the oxygen concentration in the borehole itself and not necessarily inside the mine.
PR, man.
His agitation over the entire rescue process and how the developments were putting his company in a bad light then boiled over. He then went on to criticize the effort to reach the miners through the mine, saying progress was far too slow. There was literally nothing that could be done to speed it up though. If they went any faster, they would be putting the lives of the rescuers in danger. They had to proceed cautiously in the clearly unstable mine, taking care to install man-made supports as needed. Almost a week passed after the coal burst trapped the 6 miners when a camera was put down the second borehole in hopes of getting eyes on the situation inside. The only thing that could be seen in the section, however, was a few feet of rubble covering the main floor. By then, only about
They're all dead, man.
The main west tunnel had been cleared of rubble, and conditions only seemed to get worse for the rescue crews. Seismic events kept taking place inside the mine, and by August 16th, so 10 days after the initial collapse, 41 were recorded. None of them, however, originated from the south barrier where the miners were trapped. They were all coming from a different area known as Entry Number 1, which is where the rescuers were working. In fact, on August 15th, the shaking got so bad that an excavator used in the rescue effort was mostly buried by coal breaking loose from the ceiling. This became such a concern for rescuers that 12 of them asked to be relieved from duty.
Holy shit.
Unfortunately, their sense of trepidation and the seismic events themselves were largely ignored. Something was still happening inside the mine, and the officials leading the rescue operation were doing their best not to confront the possibility that continuing to dig toward the trapped miners was too dangerous. The removal of rubble continued, and as it did, no one seemed to notice that more of the pillars that had become piles were compressed and therefore helping to support some of the weight above. This meant that as the rubble was removed, it was actually
Dude, imagine being a rescuer and you die trying to rescue somebody.
contributing to the instability of the
It
mine.
was like, this kind of reminds me about that other story where it was like the gym teacher or some shit took the kids to the cave and it like rained like 50 inches of rain or whatever, and they got trapped in there and shit. You guys remember that? There were 2 rescuers that like lost their lives trying to get them. Yeah, it was like a soccer team or something. Yeah.
Soon enough, those who hadn't begged to stop the rescue out of fear were about to find that out. As it approached 7 p.m. on August 16th, the pillars between entries 1 and 2 suddenly and violently gave way as coal burst out in every direction like shrapnel from a grenade. When it did, it smashed into everything in the area, including rescue workers. So much coal collapsed that when the dust cleared, there was 4 feet or about a meter of rubble and debris piled up between the 2 entries. The coal burst alone killed 2 more miners and 1 inspector, and another 6
Holy shit.
suffered major but non-life-threatening injuries.
They just died
Then,
instantly.
at that day's press conference, the owner announced that his company filed paperwork with the federal government to close and seal the Crandall Canyon Mine forever.
Had I known that this evil mountain, this alive mountain, would do what it did, I would never have sent the miners in here.
In his own preliminary assessment of what
This is the shittiest apology I think I've ever seen in my life.
caused the 2 tragic accidents, he told reporters that the blame rests on the mountain itself because it was supposedly evil.
Blame the mountain. Are you kidding me, bro? You have a mountain that you don't have to go into, right? You don't have to, you know? You go in the mountain and you're going to blame the mountain? What?
The U.S. Department of Labor, however, didn't share that opinion. An investigation into both incidents got underway, and the final report that was issued found multiple causes, including some caused by corporate neglect. Here's what the MSHA determined. The coal outburst on August 6th in the South Bear section was so significant that it took out around half a mile or 805 meters of coal pillars. At the point of the outburst where the 6 miners were working, coal likely exploded from the broken pillars like pellets spreading larger and larger as they traveled. It's believed that all 6 were killed instantly, likely before they knew what was happening.
Holy shit.
If any of them somehow survived the blast of debris, the destruction of the ventilation system would have caused air significantly deficient in oxygen to flood the trapped section.
Yeah.
Essentially, the workers were doomed the moment their shift began the previous evening.
Wow.
The actual root cause of the tragedy, though, was traced back to the engineering analysis done by...
That's really dark to think about, man. You're going to die as your shift starts, and you don't even know it.
a separate company. Apparently, during the investigation, it was determined that all of the recommendations made by this analysis for safely retreat mining were extremely flawed. Unfortunately, then, from this incorrect analysis, a roof control plan was drawn up by the mine operator, which led to insufficient pillar dimensions and an overall incorrect design of the mine. And in fact, the August 6th and 16th incidents weren't even the first coal outburst the mine experienced either. In March of 2007, just 5 months before those deadly events, coal bursts started occurring and got more frequent over time. And one occurred just 3 days before the August 6th outburst. None of the bursts preceding the August 6th event were strong enough to cause any fatalities, but the mine operator should have taken these as signs of growing instability, the report concluded.
That's even
Instead,
more, dude.
mining
Of course they continued to mine. Okay.
coal in conditions that were growing more and more unsafe when it was clear that the roof control plan was not adequate enough to ensure the safety of miners from coal bursts. But among the infractions the company committed, one of the most egregious was that the company failed to inform the MSHA about several coal bursts, and they even misled the agency about the severity of one of them. Because of this,
Yeah, what I say, man, what I say at the beginning of this video, it's the corporate greed shit, because you're not a person. You're not human. You're just a number to them. A replaceable number, man.
the MSHA didn't have an opportunity to investigate these incidents. And had the agency been able to look into the outbursts, it may have prevented the August tragedy from occurring at all. As for the incident on August 16th, the removal of collapsed yet compacted coal in the effort to reach the trapped miners caused more and more instability in an already unsafe environment. The pressure from the weight of the coal on the insufficient pillars continued to grow until the pillars between entries 1 and 2 couldn't bear the load anymore and gave way. In the end, the final report listed 9 infractions committed by the company that directly led to the incidents and 1 by the engineering company. The MSHA then levied...
These motherfuckers should be charged with murder. That's legit murder, man. You're legitimately sending people to their death.
the highest fines possible against the mining company, totaling more than $1.6 million. The engineering company was also ordered to pay $220,000 in fines. It's unclear if the mine owner was directly fined or if the company was responsible for paying some or all of the mine operator fines, as the final report did not point specific fault at either the owner or the parent company. And tragically, on September 1st, the rescue effort was called off after 4 weeks of attempts.
Damn, feels
And
bad.
2 months after the tragedies, inside Crandall Canyon Mine, the main passages were sealed with bricks, leaving these 6 bodies still trapped inside with the hopes of one day being able to recover them. As of 2024, there have been no further attempts to recover the bodies left in the Crandall Canyon Mine's south barrier. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to send it to the form found in the description, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
That video was sick, man. Video was sick.